What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the spot where we kick back and react to all kind of different things. Alright, so what we got going on today? We're about to get into a science video with Science Unbound. This one is called Antimatter Weapons, Threat or Ridiculous Pipe Dream. Alright, so you all seen plenty of games, movies, stuff like that. Always antimatter weapons, a weapon that will hit you and just break down your entire structure. Seems deadly, seems dangerous, but possible. Find out.
God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And that is all entirely inaccurate. Unless you believe the universe is only 10,000 years old, then whether God exists or not doesn't change the fact that there was light in the universe for billions of years before the earth even formed. And if there hadn't been light, there wouldn't have been any liquid water on the surface of the planet to hover over. Now, look, we know to poke holes in Genesis. Phil Collins did that all by himself. But what we do want to do is go back to the very beginning.
Nice though, Phil Collins
even further
joke.
back. To before the Earth was formed. Let's go all the way back to the year 13.7 billion BC, give or take, to the moment when the Big Bang took place. The Big Bang created all of the matter in the universe, but it also created something else. It created something that you could never physically hold, but is worth 3,000 times more than all the gold on Earth. We are, of course, talking about love. No, we're talking about antimatter. This is the science of science fiction, isn't it? The Big Bang should have created equal amounts of matter and antimatter. Why it didn't is one of the biggest mysteries of our era. But it clearly could not have, because when matter and antimatter collide, they annihilate one another, releasing huge amounts of energy. If there would have been equal amounts of both, then everything in the universe should have been, well and truly annihilated. Scientists hear that statement and they see it as a giant cosmic puzzle. How could the universe, as we know it, have come into being? It's an open question, and it's one with a lot of interesting theories that we're not going to get into today, because while what scientists said was a complex mystery, world leaders don't have that sort of attention span. They only heard about every 20th word of that statement, so the only thing that picked up in their brains was antimatter could annihilate everything. And it's
I love it. I love it throwing shade at the politicians. Oh man, that is true though. You ever notice? Anytime you try to explain it, they take a key sentence and run with it instead of actually listening to the entire thing. At least that's what they do when they're on stage talking to people. It's like, come on now.
true. Antimatter weapons would be the most devastating weapons that the world has ever seen. But is this a real threat, or is it just a ridiculous pipe dream? Let's find out. How dangerous is antimatter? As with most things, the danger level of antimatter is a question of scale. Antimatter is produced in nature all the time. There could even be an antimatter particle in your house right now. Oh no! But look, if there was, it's already gone. Antimatter isn't actually that uncommon. I mean, take bananas, for example. Bananas contain potassium-40, a very slightly radioactive isotope of potassium. As these atoms decay, they produce one positron every 75 minutes or so, and they are annihilated within a nanosecond of being produced when they collide with an ambient electron. And if we didn't tell you any of this, you probably wouldn't have ever known it happened. So to weaponize antimatter, it's clearly going to take more than just a single particle. Now, at this point, we should probably define what antimatter actually is and make sure that everybody is on the same page. You're welcome. Antimatter.
Yep. Pay attention. Here's the explanation, especially you politicians. Pay extra attention.
is basically just the opposite of regular matter. Instead of negatively charged electrons, you have positively charged positrons. Instead of positively charged positrons, you have negatively charged antiprotons. And instead of nice, lawful, neutral neutrons, you have chaotic, neutral antineutrons. Okay, that last part we totally made up. They both just have a boring neutral charge, but that's not very interesting. But really, the thing is, to explain the difference between neutrons and antineutrons, we'd need to start talking about quarks and baryon numbers, and no, nobody cares. When you describe it like that, it's pretty simple. I now assume you understand. So, getting back on track, a single antimatter particle isn't going to do anything, but how much does it take to cause some serious damage? The answer is actually very little. The atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki contained a payload of 6.4 kilograms of plutonium and had a blast yield of 21 kilotons. The same amount of energy would be released by the detonation of 1/2 gram of antimatter. Now, there are a couple of important things to note here. First, not all 6.4 kilograms of the core of Fat Man underwent nuclear fission. But even with that caveat, the annihilation of antimatter and matter produces 300 times as much energy as the nuclear fission or fusion of the same amount of material. Unlike either of those processes, antimatter releases energy with 100% efficiency, since energy is the only byproduct of the reaction. Now look, weapons have come a long way since World War II, and we no longer measure nuclear explosions in kilotons. The largest weapon ever detonated was the Tsar bomber, with a blast yield of over 50 megatons. It was designed to be able to produce a 100 megaton blast, but the test was scaled down due to concerns about the amount of radiation it would produce, as well as the inability of a pilot to actually get far enough away from the explosion in time to survive. This remains the most destructive weapon the world has ever seen, and the same effect could be produced with only 1.1 kilograms of antimatter. In terms of pure explosive force, there is likely nothing in the universe that can compare to the power of antimatter. And ironically, these explosions would actually be safer than nuclear weapons. The bomb dropped on Nagasaki resulted in 60 to 80,000 deaths, not counting all of the long-term consequences of the fallout. Antimatter weapons don't produce radiation
I'm about to say,
nuclear fission.
That would have to be the only reason. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, how is it safer? Is it like no radiation is dropped after the explosion?
Does, meaning that only the blast itself would be dangerous. If a military had access to antimatter weapons, not only would they likely be the most powerful weapons the world has ever seen, but they'd probably be willing to use them. Without the fear of fallout radiation and the effects it would have on the environments, then why not deploy antimatter weapons? As long as your targets were military bases that were far enough away from civilians, an antimatter bomb would be a great way to take out an entire base in one strike without unnecessary collateral damage or causing, a nuclear winter.
But first getting past the how will we harness it question and everything, if somebody figures it out, you already know what happens. One government figures it out, starts making the weapons, and then because they'll need money, they start selling the secrets to their allies. And then next thing you know, secrets start getting lost because shady deals under the table. Next you know, before you know it, everybody has them. And next you know, just like with nuclear weapons, we have freaking antimatter weapons. Everybody's pointing antimatter weapons at each other. And us as civilians, we're just like, hope nobody has a bad day and decides to just hit that button. Just I'm not seeing a big difference here in terms of warfare and everything. In fact, the idea that they'll be a little bit more trigger happy because of no radiation actually makes this a little bit worse. So I really hope that it's a pipe dream. I really hope that it's not something that we can really harness.
The incredibly high blast yields created by very small amounts of antimatter and the lack of radiation, antimatter weapons would absolutely be a huge threat. They would be the most incredible advancement in warfare since drones, and we already know that antimatter can and has been created in labs, so, well, are these weapons an imminent threat?
Absolutely not.
And the answer there is absolutely no chance. Like we said, antimatter has already been created in labs, and we already know its destructive properties. And you could bet your ass that every major military power has already put their best scientists to work researching the possibility of building antimatter weapons. Fortunately, we aren't in the middle of an antimatter Cold War right now, and for one very simple reason. These weapons are a stupid idea. That's not to say that any weapons of mass destruction are necessarily a good idea, but there is a strategic reason that militaries would want to have nuclear weapons. Antimatter weapons, on the other hand, are the world's most expensive form of suicide and/or friendly fire. It's true that antimatter particles have been made in labs, but it's not really very easy to do. Even more difficult than creating antimatter is storing antimatter. I mean, where are you actually planning on keeping this shit? It can't touch anything, or it will annihilate. We couldn't even store it in the empty void of space because it isn't actually empty enough. There's roughly one particle in every cubic meter of empty space, so eventually any matter would be annihilated. However, there is a solution known as a penning trap. This is a device that uses a combination of electric and magnetic fields to hold the particles in place. While it has been successfully used to hold particles, and CERN holds the record for holding an antiproton in a penning trap for 405 days, the process doesn't scale well. You simply couldn't store large amounts of material in this way. Even if we found a way to store larger amounts, it needs to be absolutely foolproof. There is one very simple rule when it comes to bombs. The things should not go boom before you want them to. An antimatter bomb would need a massive power supply in order to contain the antimatter, and it could never fail. Losing power for even a fraction of a second would be enough to detonate the bomb. They would simply be too risky to manufacture and too risky to
A fraction of a second? Knowing how some of our fans be tripping on this, yeah, nah, that's not happening.
store, as the possibility of an accidental detonation would just be extremely high. But really, who's that gonna stop? Scientists kill themselves all the time doing stupid shit when they should have known that. Maybe not all the time, but it still happens often enough. The Demon Corps claimed the lives of multiple scientists performing separate, irresponsible experiments, so surely someone would want to try and make a bomb capable of safely delivering a payload of antimatter to a target location. Militaries would be inclined to pay them to do so as well, so what's really standing in our way? And as with all things, the answer is predictably money. We mentioned earlier that only half a gram of antimatter could create an explosion the same size as the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. So how expensive is a gram of antimatter? Well, as of 2019, the cost of 1 gram of antimatter was over $2.5 quadrillion. To give that some perspective, the cost of 1 gram of antimatter is equivalent to the entire world's GDP for roughly 25 years. Alternatively, if you were to take every single penny of every currency in the entire world right now, you'd only be able to create about a 1/500th of a gram of antimatter. Fortunately, it's not like you'd be
Human greed saves us. You know, if we didn't think in terms of money, then we might be pushing forward to make this happen. But human greed saves us. The fact that we got to put a price tag on everything and something this rare, we screwed ourselves by making it too expensive for us. We saved ourselves with stupid greed.
paying that entire thing up front. To date, only a few nanograms of antimatter have been produced in total worldwide. At current production rates, it would take something on the order of tens of millions of years to actually produce an entire gram of it. These numbers are all comical in nature, and there's just no way that any sort of antimatter weapon would be realistic. Even the United States military isn't going to go near something that expensive. The entire Manhattan Project to develop the world's first atomic bombs only cost about $33 billion in today's money. That's about 1/millionth of what a project to create antimatter weapons would cost. There's just no way that these things are going to exist. Wrap up. If antimatter weapons existed, they would be a major threat. They could have far more destructive power than nuclear weapons, but without all of that nasty fallout that everyone just hates. This means that militaries would be a lot less reserved in deploying such weapons. But again, that's if they existed. The reality is that it's just not going to happen. It would cost all of the money, and it would take millions of years just to create a single antimatter bomb. And that's assuming everything just went perfectly according to plan, which it wouldn't. Now look, people are looking for workarounds to make the weapons more realistic, but the solutions honestly cause more problems than they create. One popular suggestion is antimatter bullets rather than antimatter bombs. The theory behind this idea is that you'd need far less antimatter for a bullet, but that's about the only part of it that makes sense. An antimatter bullet would be far more destructive than necessary, and you'd still need a way to store the antimatter. Having a bullet that requires a massive amount of electricity at all times.
So not only the massive amount of electricity, but remember what they said, how big the explosion is? A handgun? That's suicide. That's suicide. You shoot something, the explosion takes you out with it. Doesn't matter how far away. You're not going to be able to get far away enough to avoid an explosion from a handgun using antimatter. No matter what target you're hitting or how far away the target's supposed to be, it's not going to be far away, far enough for you to survive it.
Including while it's chambered in the gun to the point of reaching its target, is just, well, it's silly. Of course, there's always the chance that future technology will make this all much more plausible. According to a study from the Rand Corporation, while under contract from the US Air Force, there should be the ability to produce 10 trillion antiprotons per second, as well as transportable antiproton reservoirs within the next 5 to 7 years. That is heralding some incredible progress that would make antimatter weapons far more realistic. But since the paper in question was published back in 1985, it's probably safe to say that their estimations were just a tiny bit optimistic. Besides, we have better things to do with antimatter than try to build weapons anyway. Antimatter could be used as a source of power or a form of propulsion. If antimatter annihilation could be performed in a controlled way, it would be far more efficient and far more powerful than any rocket fuel we could ever develop. And if anything went wrong, antimatter explosions happen so quickly that the crew wouldn't feel a thing, which is nice.
Which is nice, huh? Just that don't even know what happens to you. Just on the other side, like, what was this? I don't know. Powering cities and everything. What you know? Would you be for an antimatter power plant if we ever figured it out? As we all know, the whole behind the weapons idea, like I said, it's most likely not going to happen because of how unstable it is. Trying to run around, hit a target, and then get away before the explosion takes you out too. Yeah, not really seeing that happen. Plus, if it goes wrong for a fraction of a second, you're dead. Period. The risk is way too high in that regard. But wouldn't that also mean to be too high for a power plant too? Because if one thing goes wrong, one little bitty thing, the entire plant goes up. So I don't know. Maybe we need to just abandon the entire manipulating antimatter idea. But you know we're not. You know those that's going to keep on trying until they figure out a solution. So if they do, let's just hope that solution does not help a weapons project. Anyway, y'all know what to do. Go down in the comment section. Let me know what y'all thought about this one. Let me know what you'd like to see me react to next. Hit that like button before you go. Share this video with everyone you know. And subscribe if you haven't done so already, alright? So, till next time, take care of yourselves. And I'm out of here.